It's my feel-good breakfast show.
It is your feel-good breakfast show, Expresso here on S3. And of course, we need to get some more details on this mayor situation. Now, we need to bring in some of those experts to make sure that we understand what the implications of a new mayor is. The Kenny Kunene 2-day stint, as well as all of the other factors around that. And Kuhle is standing by to give us a little bit more detail.
Thank you so much, Carl. Good morning to everyone in studio. Molweni Nonge Mzansi. I hope that today you woke up feeling so good. Indeed, we are coming to you live this morning with award-winning economist, entrepreneur, and impact investor Ndumiso Hadebe to discuss all things that the Johannesburg mayoral office has been faced with most recently, and of course, newly appointed Mayor Ukabelo Gwamanda. Good morning, Ndumiso. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
First things first, what would you say are some of the challenges that the Joburg mayoral office has faced over the past few years in terms of governance and service delivery?
Well, certainly, I think it goes without saying that since the previous local government elections, the city of Johannesburg in particular has faced a number of political leadership changes, which has led to some level of relative instability from a political leadership and political tone point of view. And I think this is a very important discussion when we really look at it in the context of the role of cities and the role of metros in terms of driving economic development. By 2030, estimates are that over half of the world's population will be living in cities, and that will account for over 80% of the world's GDP. The city of Johannesburg is located within that context, especially given that it's located in a province such as the Gauteng province. And some studies have suggested that annually over 300,000 people migrate from other provinces into Gauteng, and in particular the city of Johannesburg. So what does that say to us? It says that the city of Johannesburg is a metro that is focused with a lot of pressure from an infrastructure and service delivery point of view, and as a result, good governance and political stability becomes a precursor in order to respond to those pertinent issues that you and I as residents of Johannesburg are faced with on a day-to-day.
So this is a big deal. It's a big role to kind of take on. What do you think about the newly elected Mayor Ukabelo Gwamanda? Do you think that he has what it takes to take on such a role of this magnitude? Well,
it's the interesting times of the coalition politics, isn't it? Following his predecessor, Ukabelo had of the 226 odd votes and city council, he had beaten his other counterparts by about 139 and 15 in certain instances. And so it creates an interesting dilemma as to say, Ukabelo comes from a minority political party. What does that say around the political mandate that he received, given the support that he has received from mainly, I think, the ANC and other minority parties and so forth? So I think what becomes quite important for Ukabelo in this instance is to ensure that there is indeed, number one, political stability within City Council and within the mayoral office as well, but as well ensuring that the political direction and the tone is set correctly, because that then permeates in terms of the public sector officials that then render the services that you and I offer, especially in a time where we're faced with significant power outages that has a negative impact on the electricity infrastructure that we have, but of course water services, isn't it? We've seen in recent months water shortages as a result of the power outages. So that becomes quite important, that stability there, so that services can be rendered in an efficient manner and resources can be allocated efficiently.
I absolutely love that. Set a firm foundation in order for you to kind of execute the role to your best of your ability. Now, you know, what do you have to say about some of the negative allegations that are leveled against Ukabelo Gwamanda?
Some of those negative allegations, I think what's most important is that they need to be tested. There have been a lot of information that we have been receiving in various platforms, but I think at the end of the day, if we're talking about good governance and we're talking about communicating a stable government within the city of Johannesburg, those things or those allegations need to be tested. And once they're tested, then the adequate responses need to be made in that respect. Of course, in the perfect scenario, such allegations would not be the ideal, specifically given the nature of the challenges that the city of Johannesburg faces. But I think they would need to be tested as speedily as possible, so that the focus of the political leadership is really on what needs to be done for the residents of the city of Johannesburg.
Now let's briefly touch on the short stint by popular businessman, Kenny Kunene,
Yes.
who was acting mayor for 48 hours. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's quite interesting, again, the dynamics of coalition politics. From a materiality point of view, in terms of whether or not it would have an impact on the collection of revenues or impairments in the city of Johannesburg, it does not necessarily have a material impact when it comes to those issues. But what it does leading up to 2024, it sort of presents an opportunity for the Patriotic Alliance, for example, to demonstrate some of the positioning that they've placed themselves in the political landscape today. One of the positioning that they claim to have had is around, of course, political stability and, of course, ultimately how they deal with questions of migration within the province and within the city. So I think it was a demonstration of that branding and positioning in the political landscape.
Ndumiso, thank you so much for joining us and giving us a bit more insight of what exactly is happening in the Johannesburg mayoral office. If you are part of the conversation, keep it going on our social media platforms using the hashtag Expresso Show. We will continue the discussion shortly after this.
Fascinating. Eh?
Thank you very much, Kutle. Yes, we'll be back with her in just a little bit. Stick around with us.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to Feel Good Breakfast Show Expresso here at S3, and we are continuing our conversation today.
Absolutely. We are chatting to you. We hang out with you. It's World Baking Day. There's lots happening. But now we are heading back to Johannesburg, where Kutle is standing by.
We are continuing our conversation this morning with award-winning economist, entrepreneur, and impact investor Ndumiso Hadebe about all things newly elected Mayor Kabelo Kwamanda. Ndumiso, you touched on some of the predecessors and the work that still needs to go into, fixing the city of Johannesburg. What do you think Kabelo needs to change compared to his predecessor?
I think there's certainly a couple of things. Kabelo has a very short period of time prior to next year's 2024 general elections. And so I think the first part around political stability and political tone is quite important. But secondly, it needs to contextualize some of the challenges that we have and really focus on some of the strategic elements. Presently, we're faced with significant load shedding, in certain instances, power outages. So we need to ensure that aspects and entities in the city of Johannesburg that are responsible for ensuring that those services are delivered have the requisite capacity and they have the resources required in order to service their obligations to their residents. I think that's the first point. The second point is certainly around what the city of Johannesburg needs to look like in the long term, in the next 10 years. There were some data points that came out to say there's about an infrastructure backlog in the city of Johannesburg to the tune of over 300 billion rands, specifically over the next 10 years. And so there needs to be some kind of conceptualization as to what are the practical steps that need to be taken in order to respond to those, especially given that fiscal allocations for such are around 7.7 billion rands annually. So clearly there's a shortage and a shortfall there. And that's where stakeholder relations becomes quite important. And I guess that from an impact investment point of view, that's where you can leverage some of those tools and instruments that are available from the city. There are preconditions, though. Some of those preconditions is the question of good governance. In about 30th of June 2021, most of the metros in South Africa were downgraded by some of the ratings agencies. And so that becomes another important focus, because when we're talking about reining in other forms of resources and capital to respond to the infrastructure backlog, there needs to be some level of confidence from participants that indeed, from a governance point of view, the city of Johannesburg is indeed managed correctly. So those are some of the key strategic elements that I think Kabelo needs to, or the mayor needs to manage in this instance.
He's got a lot in his hands, right?
Certainly does.
Now,
certainly
looking
does.
into the past and obviously projecting into the future, how would you say that the mayoral office in Johannesburg has addressed issues of transparency, of service delivery, of governance in the past?
There've been some significant challenges when it comes to really looking at how the city has been able to address some of those questions around accountability, transparency, and of course corruption. When we look at some of the reports from the Auditor General, we have seen that irregular expenditure has indeed been on the up, which certainly does suggest that certain internal controls and governance measures haven't been managed in a manner that certainly the Auditor General would be comfortable with. So that's an important area that demonstrates that transparency and accountability is indeed being managed in a prudent manner within the city. So that becomes an important area, focus area. The second becomes, of course, when you have a situation where there are significant power outages, an entity such as City Power, you are bound to have some level of irregular expenditure. And that can give way to unscrupulous behavior from certain parties in this instance. And so it becomes quite important that, again, from a political leadership point of view, and also the public sector officials that work within the city of Johannesburg do have the requisite support to ensure that internal controls are strengthened to avoid resources being misused in this instance. I think that will then demonstrate effective transparency, effective accountability, and of course that the city is taking good governance quite seriously going forward.
And now, what do you think should be at the top of Kabelo Kwamanda's list, or priorities, rather?
First thing, political stability and setting the correct political tone. Secondly, responding to the urgent issues related to the power outages, because that has a network effect on other services. And thirdly, ensuring that the management of stakeholder relations are managed effectively in pursuit of good and strong governance in the city.
Thank you so much, Ndumiso, for joining us this morning. It truly has been a pleasure to kick off the day with you.
Likewise, thank you.
Now, we all know and can see that the new elected mayor, Kabelo Kwamanda, has a lot on his hands, but time will tell what impact he has on the city. And that's how we wrap up this morning here in Johannesburg. I hope that you all have a blessed day.
Great stuff, Kutle. Thank you so much. And also to our guests as well. When it comes to things like this, the people need to have a say and the people need to hold those in power accountable. And Expresso is one of those platforms just for you. So make sure you look out for more of those intriguing conversations. If you have enough of potholes, enough of faulty traffic lights, enough of load shedding, then you need to have a voice as well. And we will give you that here on S3. As we get into news, Ewan is standing by.